Hotep. I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. And before I introduce my guests, I want to say that if there was ever a moment to take a knee, this is a time to take a knee and two knees to this work, not in protest, but in praise of this book, the contributors to this book, and the editor of this book, Useni Eugene Perkins, who is the president of the Association for the Positive Development of African Youth, and to one of the contributors, Charles Grantham. If it were not for my status in life, I would take two knees to you, because the rise of the Phoenix, Voices from Chicago's Black Struggle, 1960 to 1975, is an epic work and a work of major proportions. And I am delighted that you are here to talk to me about this work. So I will start with the editor, because let me say this, that I noted in the short time I've had to look at this work. I noticed that not only are you the editor of this book, but you have 7 essays in the work. Now, that is so unusual for an editor. Usually an editor will edit the work and maybe have an essay in the work. But you are represented throughout this work. So there had to be some level of commitment to this work. And I have examined it, just done a cursory examination of it. But you told me it took you 10 years, and now I understand why. So you want to talk to me about that journey, and then I'll ask you some questions along the way.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I'm just thrilled to be here, thankful, blessed, and I'm still overwhelmed by the response that this book has had in its short time since we launched it officially Sunday at the Trinity Church. It's been a labor of love, and it sounds like a cliche, but labor. But first, I think we need to, at least I need to acknowledge Hakeem Mahabuti, third world press, because this never would have been done without his support over these years. When I brought the idea to Hakim's attention about 10 years ago, he said, yeah, it sounds like something that we should do. I said, well, let's do it. And that began the process, because I'm a native of Chicago. I was born there. I love Chicago. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And during this particular period, 1960 to 1975, when the struggle that took place was epic here in Chicago, and to some extent, Chicago has just become a footnote. I'm an avid reader. Read a lot of books about the civil rights struggle, Black poetry, Black arts movement. Sometimes Chicago is right there at the bottom. I don't think we have really gotten the acknowledgement that we deserve. So I said, well, we need to tell our story. We need to let the world know how important and the role that Chicago played during this particular period, specifically. And I wanted to contain it during a particular period, 1960 to 1975, because I think those years represent some of the most critical years in our struggle for liberation. We know we had struggles prior to that, and we know that the whole history of the black man and woman's arrival as enslaved Africans have been a struggle. We can't tell the whole struggle, although I do the history piece in here, and I'm not a historian, so that in itself was quite solid. But I wanted to have the voices of the people that were involved in this struggle, that were either living in Chicago or spent considerable time in Chicago during that period. And so, with the support of Bennett Johnson, who at that time was the senior editor, Third World Press, my dear friend and spiritual mentor, Reverend John Porter, and a few other people, we began to identify people that we would like to hear from. And we had, I think a list of about 5 or 60 people. We sent letters out asking them that we would like for them to contribute and tell their stories, or you can call it testimonies, about their role and perspective, how they saw the struggle during this period. And I think out of the number, we got about 50 responses. I was very pleased with that. There's a few people, and I will say it, that I really was disappointed, but they had their own reasons. And one in particular, Dr. Anderson Thomas. Anderson and I, we spoke a lot of times. And I was really wanting them to, because of his knowledge, because of his involvement, and because of the respect that he had during this period. Because Dr. Anderson Thomas is a walking library. And so for whatever reason, but for the most part, I was very pleased that people entrusted in me their stories, that I would do very little editing unless I found some very critical discrepancies, because you're telling your story as it related to your involvement in the struggle in Chicago. So we began in 2007. This is 2017 now. And Dr. Peace, I will tell your viewers, had asked you to submit an article.
But I have a good excuse. My reason was that during that period I was raising my children, and I really didn't think I had anything of value to add. Since that time, it has occurred to me that I may have, but it is too late unless you're going to do a second volume.
We will definitely.
And I will be prepared the next time.
Yes.
But I have a lot of questions for you, but let me talk to one of the contributors. You had some bad boys in there. Among them, Dr. Conrad Worrell and Dr. Harold Pates, who are very, very prolific, and I just looked through the appendices, beautifully organized book, orchestrated book.
Let me say this about Dr. Worrell. He wanted to write his memoirs. He said, this is not your book. He had about 60 pages. So I had to cut quite a bit of his story.
But among your bad boys was Charles Grantham, who has memories of Chicago's black struggles during the 60s and 70s. So he was not in the age grade that we were in, who would have the same kind of involvement. I want to know about your involvement, because you couldn't have been but about 10 in the
That's
60s.
Right. I entitled that section Les Enfants.
Okay, right.
These are the young people growing up during that period.
Right. So talk to us about how you saw the world in 1960.
Thank you. Before I begin, I just like to thank you and definitely Useni for even asking to participate. And when I was asked, I really didn't know what I was getting involved in. I was just writing an article, I thought, and it turned out to be a lot larger than what I expected. And I'm just honored to have been included with these giants, as you've mentioned, the ones that you've named so far. But yeah, I was just coming of age, and I give credit to my wife, actually, Carolyn Grantham, for really introducing the movement. But one of the things that I mentioned in my article was that I went to Phillips High School, and I was influenced by a number of teachers. And this was in '61 when I went to Phillips High School. And there were a number of individuals, Stuckey, Mr. Stuckey.
Sterling Stuckey?
Sterling Stuckey was one of my teachers,
Okay.
who later went on, I believe, to Northwestern. Hartwell. There were a number of other teachers that influenced my thinking about being African. I had no, disconnection from Africa, but I became more aware of it as time went on. And eventually, I ended up meeting individuals, and we became involved, started going to various meetings, SNCC meetings. Also went to a meeting, Dr. Martin Luther King, down at Soldier Field, and one individual was responsible for me was a guy that we called Rabbi, who grew up in the community. And he wasn't a Jew, Jewish, but he used to wear a skull cap that was similar to a yarmulke, so I guess that's how he got his name, Rabbi. It wasn't until much later that I learned his thing. But anyway, we would go to various things, events and whatnot around the city. And we were and that's really why I like this portrait here, the cover, because I was at the Wall of Respect when, from its inception as it was being painted. Didn't really know what the purpose was, not really. But I was there. Rabbi was responsible for coming, and we would be there. And I can remember, and I write in the article that we were there one evening, and because there was always a lot of festivities around it. There was a lot of gaiety. The community was out watching this painters and the artists. And this one particular evening, there seemed to have been a heavy influence, conservation, police, plainclothes, and so forth. Even upon the buildings, surrounding buildings, there were police. And, it was like.
Why were the police there?
To this day, I couldn't tell
All
you.
right.
And again, I don't know. But Rabbi had a briefcase, and no big thing. I mean, hey, he was an intellectual, at least as far as I was concerned. And during the course of the evening, he asked me to carry the briefcase. I said, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. I'm carrying the briefcase, and Rabbi knew everybody. Everybody knew Rabbi. One plainclothes policeman comes up, speaks to Rabbi, calls him by name, and Rabbi's talking and laughing and so forth and so on. He walked off. And later on that evening, for some reason, we ended up looking into the briefcase, come to find out I'm carrying a gun. And I sort of looked at Rabbi. Rabbi sort of laughed and smiled, and was like, okay. So
I don't want to ask about the implications of that, but I can clearly see what those repercussions could have been.
Right.
So
right.
let's move to the next scene, because I'm glad you didn't get in trouble.
So am I.
Okay.
And needless to say, our friendship sort of after that. But again, that was, and my mom and I started going to African Arts Theater again. Carolyn used to dance, Darlene Blackburn, was those who
Really?
want
I
to
didn't know
dance.
that. Okay.
And on the beat, that was because Darlene
Killan,
used to
Phil
dance.
Coran.
There. So I met a lot of people, African Arts Theater. I was there when Stokely Carmichael came. But at the time, I really didn't think of it as being history. I mean, I was there, and I participated. And, you look back and it's like, yeah, I met a lot of people. And as time went on, I became more and more conscious. And as a result, my love for Africa grew to the point that after Carol and I got married, we left and went to Detroit. We eventually went to Africa and stayed for about 5 years. So the love there
Wonderful.
but it was accumulated. You know, it was started right here in Chicago, and I definitely attribute a lot of that to what was happening in the '60s.
So it
and
was a
just
coming
being
of
involved.
age for Charles
There was-
Grantham
And Carolyn,
and Carolyn.
right? Through
Okay.
Carolyn, yeah,
During
definitely.
that
No
period.
question. And it's been with me ever since. And when we came back to Chicago, we got involved with Conrad, Useni, and been around these great individuals and been heavily influenced by them, as well as yourself and others from the center.
Well, that's a great opening statement. We'll come back to you. I was pleased that you acknowledged the ancestors in the very opening of your book, and in giving some little biographical sketch of the contributors, you also acknowledged the ancestors and the history makers. Among them, Pat Hill was not yet an ancestor when this book was being
It was going
published.
to the printer. She was in the hospice. I knew about her illness, and I was tempted, but I said, no, that's not for me. That's in someone else's hand. But we had to send it to the printer the next day, and she made her transition.
Right.
So her article, I think it's very important, and I understand that I think her memorial is going to be in October.
Correct.
Yes, the
Her
14th.
daughter, I think, has read this article and has given her daughter some insight into
About
Pat
who her
Hill.
Mother
Yes, who
was.
her mother was.
Yeah.
You know, so
Well, you talked about the number. We talked about the number of articles you had in the book, but I also want to say something about one of my favorite books that you've written, which is Home is a Dirty Street. You know, I have always praised you for this book, because this book, for me, was, if you talk about coming into consciousness, this book was a consciousness raising kind of book, because you had definitions in it, and because you were so clear about what you were saying. And I want to just kind of relate it to the quote that you used in the new book from Paul Robeson. He said, the artist must take sides. He must elect to fight for freedom or slavery. I have made my choice. I had no alternate. Clearly, you had made your choice as an artist in the books that you have written, particularly this one, because this one is it's so clearly written from the standpoint of an artist who is trying to liberate his own community from false ideas, and to lift them, to elevate them to the status where they belong. Talk to me about this book. You said this is the 40th anniversary of
Yes.
Home is a Dirty Street.
yes.
So 40 years ago, you were writing plays and poems and books, and I don't know, you might have even written some songs, because I know there were songs in the Black Fairy play, so you might have written the songs that were there. But tell me about this work. I know that you were involved in the Better Boys Foundation on the West Side. Is that where you got the impetus to do this work?
Oh, yes. Those kids on the cover were members of the Better Boys Fund.
Okay.
And I was writing, but I've always wrote about things that had something to do with the injustices that we as people face. And as a social worker working with these young kids, felt that we were providing some excellent services, which we were. Many of your audience may remember Warner Saunders, who was my boss, and I worked under Warner Saunders. But Warner was very open-minded, and he gave me a lot of freedom to do things that may not be traditional, because we were doing African-focused activities, all kinds of things that are normally not associated with social agency. But our kids were getting in trouble. And we thought that we had excellent programs. And at one point, at that time, as a social worker, I would spend as much time out on the street than off. I wasn't one of these social workers just sit behind the desk. And I wanted to go out into the community, see what other influences were impacting the socialization of children. And I began to learn a lot. Because if you just stay in the agency behind the desk and the kids come in, but they thought they are going to act a certain way, they're going to behave. But yet, a lot of these kids are getting in trouble, getting caught up with juvenile justice, and so forth. So, spending more time in the streets with these kids, walking around with them, listening to them talk. That first chapter, really, I was with those kids and they were walking down the streets, cursing and flagging, kids, doing all this stuff. I'm just looking at them and everything. To get a better sense of what they had go through. And so in doing that, so I need to record this, to write, to show that a story that the traditional book of sociology may not define. And so I use a word, colony, because in Chicago,
you use ghetto, get colony.
Yeah, but I use, and then I fuse it with ghetto, because ghetto, what does that mean? Most people in Chicago lived in so-called ghettos. We know originally it comes from Warsaw, Poland, where the Jewish lived in ghettos. And colony indicates a greater sense of oppression, that other people are controlling your community. So a ghetto just means you may live in a so-called impoverished, disadvantaged community. But when you are living in a oppressed community, it's altogether different.
It's more than just being poor.
Of course. And at that time, as it is today for the most part, Lawndale was totally controlled by the white political team. Totally. You had no black politicians. The whites controlled just about everything. The economy, school, just about every life-sustaining institution was controlled by white folks.
And the same thing was true on the South Side.
Well,
name any community over here.
Well, that's true, but I'm
over there
on the West Side. Okay.
Okay.
So I said, so this community is not just a ghetto, it's a colony also. So let me fuse the word get colony. So I think there may have been others that have used the word colony to define the black community, but I don't think, at least in my research, that the word had ever been used in that way, get colony. So that's how I got the term get colony, to show the political oppression that young people.
The thing I think that caught my attention more than just the title was the social oppression of black children. How could you read a book that talked about black children being socially oppressed and not, as an adult, feel some responsibility for doing something about that? Really? Social oppression, meaning an entire society is oppressing the children, then the adult community has a responsibility to liberate their children. Because if they do not, then you will see what we are now seeing, which is the fallout from having had 40 years of the same social oppression, unrelenting. What was your experience? Because you were young at some point in time when this period was about to come into play. Did you realize, did you think that there was any injustice or unfairness? Did being at Wendell Phillips kind of shelter you? Because sometimes if you're in a community, in an environment with where all the rest of the people are you. But I was at DuSable in my youth, and we had a white principal which was the equivalent of somebody as an administrator of a colony, and we had a black assistant principal. The black assistant principal's job was to mete out discipline, to just get us in line if we got out of line. But the figurehead, the authority figure, the person who called the shot, the person who was responsible for everything else that went on in that building, including the stratification of the students into these various lanes of, all the way from disabled and uneducable up to potential college students. So I was able to see it in just the way that our people were subservient in that building, in that schoolroom. Did you see or did you feel?
That's a good question. Let me say that, first of all, my parents are from Mississippi. I was born here in Chicago.
Okay.
But we used to make summer trips to Mississippi to my parents' home every summer, and by car.
Yeah.
So I experienced, although in the community itself, it was primarily black. My teachers were black. I didn't really come in contact.
Who was the principal of the school?
At that time, it was Dr. Lewis.
Another black person. Virginia Lewis.
Virginia, yeah.
Yes.
Virginia Lewis, her husband came.
Okay.
Virginia Lewis had left.
Okay.
But he became the principal. I can't first name, but Dr. Lewis was the principal, vice principal. So all the administrators, for the most part, were black.
So you were sheltered to some extent,
in that
except for the police on the roof. Okay.
Right. But again, I was familiar with Bridgeport. I was with Cicero. My father was a fisherman, so we used to drive to these various areas and driving south. So I knew the experiences and the fear that my father had, and I say fear, but I'm sure there was some there. As we were driving to the south, going through Cairo, Illinois.
I was going to say, did you have to stop at Cairo?
Yeah. Everybody made that stop, and we couldn't use the washroom. My mother, we could get gas, and we couldn't eat at restaurants. You had to box chicken.
Right, go back in the back
to
get your order.
Right. So I had that experience. I was familiar. My father took me to the funeral of Emmett Till. So I remember saying that. I was probably 7. We were going to go fishing next day. I didn't go to bed. I ended up, my father, he slept on the couch in the living room. And I was right next to him on the floor sleeping. I didn't want to go in my bedroom viewing the body of Till. So I knew what could happen to a black, so-called black, who stepped out. So I became familiar with it. I knew that get caught in Cicero, get caught in Bridgeport at a certain time being black was not a good thing. Right. So I experienced, but as long as I was in my community, although there were white policemen coming in, I still felt a sense of security.
right,
in the black
right,
community.
right. You felt safe.
Right.
You know, Pates has a book, and in his book he has an anecdote in which he is talking about the fact that he had a paper route as a young man, and he lived in an area where the dividing line was Hyde Park. So if you crossed Cottage Grove, then you were in enemy territory. But he had to cross Cottage Grove to get his papers, to pick up his papers. And so one bright and early morning, he was actually accosted by a police officer who challenged him. First of all, there was a Caucasian woman who saw him and started walking very fast toward the police officer. And the police officer then, accosted him to challenge him for being in the neighborhood. And so all that he could do was to point out that he was a paper boy, and there was the place right there in the alley where he was going to pick up his papers. But to be terrorized, to as you said, to not feel safe, to know that there were areas in which you could lose your life, not just get beat up, but actually wind up like Emmett Till, is the kind of oppression that people understood, that people tried to, they didn't understand it, but people tried to avoid the oppression that terminated you from the planet. But then there was this everyday oppression that came from being in a position to see the adults in your community treated like children, or not respected, or ignored, or some other form of that. And so for you to point out, when you talked about the home of the brave, it took bravery just to grow up in Lawndale. I lived on the west side. I know the area that you're talking about. And I know that things have not really changed much, except you have another layer of the same thing piled higher and deeper. Have you seen anything that would make you change your mind about anything you wrote in this book? Would you modify, if you had to write a revision, would you revise anything?
No, not really. Because the Homes of Dirty Street, probably the first book nationally to write about the oppression of black children.
Mm-hmm.
There were some studies about children in the South, but in terms of the urban city, it's probably the first book. And things have not changed that significant. The type of oppression I'm talking about is basically emanated from the school system. And I talk about the school being the cradle of institutional racism.
Yes,
if I remember the quote. The
yes,
cradle.
that's exactly right.
And it hasn't changed too much. So many of our kids, and I was very familiar with the schools in Lawndale, and maybe some along the south side, but the west side had its unique problems. It had, in some of the more activist groups, I can go down to Deacons for Defense, the Black Hands side. I can go. It was on the west side. The west side was totally controlled by the machine, political machine. This is why the alderman was assassinated. I'm trying to think of his name.
Ben Lewis.
Yeah, Ben Lewis. Yes, because he was
he tried
breaking
to,
away from the machine,
yes,
and was sort of addressing some of the terrorism that the white community was imposing on Mondale. So these kids were being denied quality education. You had the Willis wagons.
Let me tell you about that, Useni, because I was raising my children. You had the Willis wagons. But at one of the schools on the west side where my children went, you had triple shifts.
Yeah.
Now, you had double shifts, where some children went to school in the morning and some children went to school in the afternoon. This school had a third shift that overlapped the morning and the afternoon. There was one in the middle of that, just to contain Black children and to keep them from crossing over a line on a map that said this was your school district and you could not cross this line, even though you could see that there was a school across the street with empty classrooms. Our children were confined. In this particular school, there was a class, they made a classroom out of the janitor's closet where he kept his cleaning materials. They took them all out. They put desks in there. We protested that. We had, guess who as our leadership? Gus Savage.
Yes.
So we protested that, and we went through, you have these layers. So you go through the principal, then you go to the assistant district superintendent, then the district superintendent. Everything to keep you from winding up down at the office of Benjamin Willett. But that's where we that's where we had to finally go. But we had to go through the chain of command before we could there's a new school sitting on that corner of Roosevelt and California right now that is the product of those efforts. But you talk about the school being the cradle of institutional we also had a white principal who was very insensitive and didn't see anything wrong
that's where
with the arrangement.
Within the school system, and the same thing is happening today. As Barbara, Dr. Sizemore would say in her book, we've been walking in circles.
Exactly. That's the name of her book is Going in Circles.
We've been walking in circles. So things have not changed. I think that today, that more of our kids are being criminalized. When young people do not get the proper education, when they don't get the proper nutrition, when the life-sustaining institutions are dysfunctioning, and I'm talking about social service agencies, Charles and I, we were talking about, you don't have viable social service agencies in our community. At that time, we had Better Boys Foundation, you had boys clubs, you had youth centers, you had so many others. And now you don't have that. So our kids are being thrown out on the street as they were doing those days, but at least you had institutions that were making an effort to make some changes. And
you had people who were making some effort to make some institutions change, because institutions were not making an effort.
No, but this is what I'm saying.
To change.
And I think that what's happening today is a disproportionate number of our Black youth are being criminalized. And because I still go out to the prisons, I have a very active group. We have conferences out, and these kids will tell you that when they are released on parole, what is there for them? There's no jobs, there's no training. We don't have the vocational schools, so we don't have the institutions to provide these kids with.
We don't have a life support system.
Well, that's the life-sustaining institution. So, Homeless and Dirt Street touched upon this then, and many of the role models, they survived the best way they could. They may not have been the best influences for young people, the same way today. I have said, and I don't know if I said this on your program, and people question me, the most dangerous person in the Black community, it's not the drug dealer, it's not the so-called gangbanger, but it's a miseducated Negro with a PhD. And remember, a miseducated Negro with a PhD.
Are you stealing from Carter G. Woodson?
No, I'm not stealing. I'm just using
no,
what he's saying.
I'm just trying to see Where you got that
Well,
from?
no, we know the miseducation. I got it from God, but I'm saying the most dangerous Negro today is a myth. We got more PhDs today than we've ever had. Okay? But things have not changed to any significant degree. But all of these educated Negroes, because they're miseducated, and they're a danger. A teacher with a warped knowledge and not appreciative of his or her history or heritage is dangerous.
But listen, Useni, most people don't know what education is for. You know that the party line is that you go to school to get a good education so you can get a good job. Education is not about lifting your community. Education is not about serving freedom rather than slavery. Education is not about liberating your children from social oppression, because you got it while you were getting your education. Somebody kept telling you why you're getting it. Now, your wife, Carolyn, got the Golden Apple Award,
Right.
which means excellency in teaching. How many people are excellent in what they do? How many people have a feeling, a sense of purpose, that you get your education to serve, not rather than to live the good life? And we have to change. We have to change that. We have to make people see that your reason, your raison d'être, is not so you can improve your living conditions, but you do these things because you become more valuable to yourself and to your people. This is the reason. But when you talk about nutrition, how are you going to get proper nutrition from a convenience store? You know, when they talk about food deserts, we also have healthcare deserts. How are you going to maintain good health? How are you going to maintain mental clarity or mental order when you are barraged by deprivation of every kind from every place? And whose job is it to see to it that something is being done about this? It is those people who, the PhDs, the Negroes with the PhDs, and the Negroes with the consciousness level, to be able to help to alleviate these conditions. So don't count the brothers out. Just tell them why they got the PhD. Val Ward had to tell me why I needed to get one, because I went to Northwestern and I felt oppressed there. And I said, I don't have to take this. And Val said, yes, you do. You have to stay there and get us our PhD. So
the reason why I'm saying that
them.
we put so much emphasis on the so-called drug dealer, the gangbanger, and these other matters. This is, and yes, they don't contribute to the community, but the most harmful things happening to communities coming from those. That's the only thing, the comparison I'm trying to make.
I'm not denying that. I'm saying
somebody
has to teach people why they're being educated, so that when they get the degree, they'll know why they have it. If you went into the military, before they taught you how to shoot a gun, they would teach you who the enemy was. They're not going to take you in and teach you how to use weapons of mass destruction, and you don't know who to aim them at. We have to understand that's a part of educating our children, is to make them understand that your education leads to service. that you become a more valuable person to yourself and to your community. When
I think,
when
and just to piggyback on that, I think coming of age in that particular time in the 60s for me is what led me on to my life work as it's been, and coming in contact with those individuals. So I just retired from the Chicago Public School, and after being there for 10 years. And I knew what my purpose was, although I had to teach students to the test that they were going to get, but by the same token, I allowed a lot of time in my class teaching my students things that were not on the curriculum, and it was about being Black, about our history, things that they weren't going to get otherwise. So I knew that that was my purpose.
right,
So when I was in prosthetics before, I was a servant to the people, and patients of all, it didn't matter. But again, they would usually end up getting a history lesson from me because of the type of clothes that I wore.
because
They would
you
ask
know
me
your
about myself.
purpose.
I had a purpose.
You know your purpose. That's why you have how many 40 years in, or when did you actually start writing? You know what the case I'm making is, you know your purpose. You know when you decided to quote Paul Robeson, you knew what an artist's purpose was. You knew what an artist was intended to do in this world, and you did it. Now, who told you?
Well,
Who
my
told
father
you
was
how
an
you was
example. I was very fortunate to come in contact with.
Your father was who?
My father was a sculptor. He was
What's his name?
Miriam Perkins. But I
Right.
met Paul Robeson when I was about 7 years old. Went to see his play, Othello. So I was very fortunate. So I understood Dr. Margaret Burroughs. I came in contact with artists that were politically written. So, I'm
Right.
expected to do what I'm doing.
Right.
It's
right,
no big deal.
Right. Okay, so
Okay.
you had the privilege
Yes.
of being nurtured by people who had social consciousness,
Right.
and consequently, you had no alternative
Right.
but to either work for the people or work against the people, and you dare not with your father and Dr. Margaret Burroughs and Paul Robeson and others of that kind. They held you to a standard.
Right. Right.
Are you pleased with the outcome?
Well, I'm never pleased with outcome.
No, are you pleased that you have lived up to that
Well,
standard to your ability,
I've
the
tried.
best of your ability?
I could have done better.
Okay.
And then hopefully
All right.
I'll do
Well, in
more.
your next life, you can do better. I think you're doing real well in this one.
Yeah.
Okay. So, 600 pages, 10 years later, what's next on your agenda? Just going to bask in the glory of having done this major work, or are you going to do some more for us?
No, I'm thinking about writing my memoirs.
Okay.
And so the thing about memoirs, unless you are really honest with yourself, most memoirs sometimes are not taken too seriously because they're self-serving, and it can be. Most of them are. Maybe
You got 30 seconds to tell me what you're going to say about your memoirs.
Oh, well, 30 seconds. I'm thinking about that. But there's a couple other projects. I'm thinking about writing some more children plays.
Okay.
To write things for children, we need to have more plays for children. How could I sort of make a book like this for primary graders?
Well, you got your
so,
cohort right here.
These are some of the things I'm thinking about.
Okay. Well, Charles, you got your marching orders. Start figuring out how to write children's literature now.
And I hope I can live up to it.
So,
Well, he said he
It's
tried,
children.
to the best of his ability. That's all we're asking.
Right. That's
Is
all we
give
can
us
do.
the best that you got, like Anita Baker.
Hey,
Okay.
I will do that.
All right. I'm so happy that you came.
Okay, please.
I can't believe this hour went by so quickly.
Yeah.